Okay, hey everybody, welcome back. Tonight we're going to talk about grapevine grafting, and this is for video 303, Harvest to Dormancy. If you'd like to follow along or learn some more information, you can check out the Grape Grower's Handbook, Chapter 3, page 25, but that is where I got the majority of my information from for this presentation. Okay, so introduction to grapevine grafting. If you'd like to see a little video, I have a YouTube link here in this presentation. Overall, the definition of grafting is the process of joining together two grapevine plants, a rootstock, which is generally the bottom portion, and a scion, which is the top portion, to create one single plant, right? Most grapevines across the world are grafted onto American rootstock, and that's because of phylloxera. They are the only thing that we have for now that can resist phylloxera damage, and we'll learn more about this pest in the next slide, right? Another kind of interesting kind of side info I learned was while plants have this amazing ability to join together and go through the grafting process, there's another kind of similar process called inosculation, and this is a natural phenomenon in which trunks, branches, or roots of two plants grow together in a manner biologically similar to the process of grafting. So this would be like if a tree became damaged and hit another tree, and then they rubbed against each other and they were able to make contact long enough, they would actually just kind of morph together, right? It's kind of a bizarre thing, right? But it's really cool to think that we can basically Frankenstein these plants together and that they continue to grow and produce the upper portion, and keep its own characteristics while keeping the characteristics of the lower portion of the plant, right? So a really cool example of this is not just grapevines, but also fruit salad trees. You can buy a fruit salad tree, and it contains different types of stone fruits or different types of citrus or even different varieties of apples. And it all grows on one tree. And that's through the process of grafting, which is pretty cool. Okay, so why is grafting a thing? There was a crisis where phylloxera was spreading all across the world and wiping out vineyards. This happened in the late 1880s. This tiny sap-sucking insect was spread from North America to Europe, through plant trading, basically. There wasn't any really real regulation at the time. This was just kind of a time for experimentation and excitement of, spreading plant cuttings, and we didn't really understand the ramifications of what we were doing until this happened, right? So this pest will feed off of the roots, which in turn will inject toxins into them that create large galls and eventually girdles and kills the vines. So these galls, tuberosities, these toxins kill the cells essentially, and then it chokes out the vine. So it's unable to take up any water, nutrients, and it will eventually die. Right. So the European grapevine, which is Vitis vinifera, is not resistant to this pest at all. As a result, during this crisis, over 40% of France's vineyards were destroyed, and over 70% of all European vineyards were destroyed by phylloxera. So, fun stuff. I was totally aware of this history when I took courses at UC Davis, but I did not realize that this was the key crisis or event that happened that triggered all of these agricultural based inspections and procedures that we have today. So I think that's really cool. So I included a couple slides about that for your information, right? So like I mentioned, before the mid-19th century, there were not many formal science-based regulations regarding the movement of plants and agricultural goods between countries. Because phylloxera aphid caused such a huge devastation, it was such a major event that it led to the development of formal organizations that still exist today. So after this outbreak, we saw the first international phytosanitary agreement in 1878. Phytosanitary just refers to the sanitation of plant materials. So representatives from all different countries came to Bern, Switzerland. They signed the International Convention on Measures to be Taken Against Phylloxera vistatrix, which is this formal name for phylloxera. They created a system of government certification process, which outlines specific procedures for the government to certify and ensure that the phylloxera-free status for plant material traded internationally In addition to that, they created a system where there were formalized import inspections. So not only were we testing vines before they went out, we were testing vines again when they came in. And these were put into place for imports to be held for inspection and testing before allowing them to be planted. So it's a double check procedure. It's a very good procedure. We still utilize this to this day. In addition to that, so that was like the first big thing, and that was 1878, mind you. In 1880, we saw the creation of the State Board of Viticultural Commissioners in California. And phylloxera became a big problem for us in 1873. This is where, we were planting a lot of European vines. We're trying to establish vineyards, and we're saying, what the heck? Phylloxera is everywhere. So our State Board of Viticultural Commissioners came to be, and this helped mandate scientific examinations and reports to manage the pests. And this board still exists today. They release yearly reports. It's pretty interesting information, and even though we have kind of figured out how to keep phylloxera at bay, there are always new and kind of bizarre, I don't want to say interesting, but diseases and pests that are attacking the wine industry, grapes, all the time. So there's always something to be looking out for. Fast forward to 1912. So we saw a convention happen. The state of California created their own agricultural board, and now as an entire nation, the United States passed the Plant Quarantine Act of 1912, which authorized the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, to inspect agriculture products and organize border quarantines. So this is a big deal. So when you drive through borders of different states or regions or national parks even, you'll often see an agricultural checkpoint. The one that you probably see the most is the one in Tahoe, right? We have to be careful when we're transporting things. If we have taken cuttings on our camping, or we brought in things, right? This could harm potential ecosystems, plants, and even could spread invasive species to other ecosystems, right? So we have to be aware of these things. So that was passed in 1912 to help organize border quarantines, right? Then in 1951, fast forward even more, we saw the creation of the International Plant Protection Convention. This is the IPPC. They're linked here in this presentation. They still exist today. And this is where we finally established global phytosanitary standards. So global standards, so no matter where you're coming from or where you're going, if you're trading plant or agriculture products, they absolutely need to be tested, right, in quarantine. So we have standards for that. One of our most popular and one of our closest plant services is the Foundation Plant Services at UC Davis. This is a foundation, of course, that quarantines and tests grapevines and other plants as well. So, for example, if you were to visit a foreign country and discover a new grapevine and you wanted to bring it back to the U.S. for studying, it would have to go through Foundation Plant Services first, go through all the testing, make sure we're not bringing in some foreign pest or disease. Then from there, you could make cuttings, propagate it, you could test it, you could do studies on it, you could sell it. From there, you're in a good spot, right? But it has to go through Foundation Plant Services before you can start planting it in our soil. So, something fun. They do tours. Very cool place to check out. Highly recommend it. State of the art. It's really cool. Okay, so that brings us to the next question. Does everyone graft their grapevines? The answer is no. And that's because it's either in a part of the world that has been untouched by phylloxera, bizarrely enough, or it's very unlikely habitat for phylloxera to persist, right? So it really depends. Some famous regions include Australia, so the Barossa Valley. They have self-rooted vines. They have lots of old, ancient ancestor vines that have been alive for decades. They have a very strict quarantine policy to keep phylloxera out of those vineyards. So this would include wearing covers on your boots, not allowing vehicles to drive through, right? You could track in pests without realizing it, right? So these are highly protected regions. Next, we have Germany and the Mosel Valley. We have very low to no instances of phylloxera because the soils are very nutrient poor, so it just doesn't thrive in that area, which is great for Germany. We also have places in Chile, Argentina, and Greece, particularly Santorini. We also have old vineyards in New Zealand, and we also have old self-rooted vineyards in Washington and Oregon State, right? So in these cases, for some of these vineyards, they do have phylloxera, and their future is uncertain, right? So just because your vineyard has phylloxera doesn't mean that it's doomed in the next 2, maybe even 5 years. It's really within a decade or so, that maybe even longer, depending on how prevalent it is on your site, that it would decimate all of your vines, right? So something to consider. Okay, now we're going to take a look at the components of grapevine grafting. So we have 3 major players here. We have the scion, which is the portion up top, which produces all the fruit, the leaves, the bushy part. That's the scion, right? So this is typically Vitis vinifera. This is the European variety, the grapes that we know and love, Cabernet Sauvignon, Grenache, Tempranillo, etc., right? This is the wine portion of the vine, right? Then we have the graft union. This is where the scion and rootstock come together. This is where the grafting takes place. And then we have the rootstock, which is the portion below the grafting union. And we're gonna talk about it, but there's so many different types of rootstocks, different advantages, disadvantages to rootstocks. It's very site specific and depends on the goals that you have for your vineyard. Okay, so taking a closer look of where the cut happens for a grafting union. And as you can see, we have, again, 3 major players, right? So this is a cutting of either a branch or the main stem of a plant, right? And on the outermost part, we have the bark. This is what protects the plant, right? It slowly peels back over the years as it grows. The next layer that we see is the phloem. And this transports nutrients, sugars, signaling molecules throughout the plant. The main function is to move food from the leaves to other portions of the plant. The next layer of tissue is extremely important. This is called the vascular cambium. This is a layer of plant tissue that's responsible for secondary growth. So this is also calling for increased girth. So the width of the stem or the branch, right? This is due to the vascular cambium. It's specifically located between the xylem and phloem in the stems and roots of most vascular plants. So this is responsible for a lot of the growth. And then last but not least, we have the xylem, which is this inner portion. And this is what transports water and minerals and provides structural support for the plant. So a very short introduction to some of the anatomy, but the cambium is a very important part for grafting. So we're going to talk about that, right? Okay, so cambial contact is essential for a successful graft, right? So that is the layer of tissue that is responsible for that growth, right? So that is where the forces join together in grafting, and then everything else kind of follows suit from that, right? So the goal is to join the xylem and phloem of 2 different plants. We want them to connect, and we want those highways to keep working as they were working in the original plant so the new plant can survive, right? To be successful, the vascular cambium of the 2 plants must be in contact of each other, right? So that implies there's some flexibility between xylem and phloem, but the cambium absolutely has to have contact, right? So here's an up-close picture of what good cambial contact looks like, and then no cambial contact, right? So this left portion would be something that's most likely to take and be successful as a graft, and this one on the right would be very unlikely to be successful, right? Okay. Another point that's important to keep in mind is both tissues must be kept alive until the graft has taken. So it makes sense, right? You want the cells in both portions, the rootstock and the scion, to be alive so that way it can form that union and create that graft before it goes into dormancy. If the vine is in dormancy, it's not in a growing stage, so it's not going to connect, right? For grapevines, the cut and the graft can just take a couple of weeks to heal, but it will actually take a couple of years before the vine is producing quality fruit. So while grafting is very fun, it's a very slow process, and we practice a lot of patience in grape growing and wine, just in general, right? Okay, so we have benefits of grafting grapevines, and the first one is the one we talked about the most, disease resistance, right? So rootstocks have been bred to withstand not just phylloxera, but other pests like nematodes and other diseases. Another thing that rootstocks are fantastic for is you can select specific rootstocks for your soil and your climate conditions, right? So you can choose something to be more drought resistant, something to handle waterlogged soils, something to handle like salinity, lots of things. Also, the rootstock absolutely affects the yield of your variety. So certain rootstocks can help make vines more productive, or they can make grapevines less productive. So depending on your goals, if you have extremely high fertile soils, maybe you want to tone it back a little bit. Maybe if you have nutrient poor soils, maybe you want to help encourage that growth. It just depends on your site, honestly. So these are examples of clonal selections. So there's different clones of rootstocks, just like there's different clones of grape varieties too. So you'll have lots of options to customize your vines for your needs. Okay, here's just a picture of how grafts affect different products, right? So here we have a picture of different types of fruit trees. We have apple, pear, plums, peach, nectarines, etc. And just from the rootstock selection alone, which are all these interesting combination of letters and numbers on this first line, just the rootstock affects the size of the tree. So this is extremely important in agriculture, right? This isn't just like a fun, like playing God or something like that, right? This, if you're trying to run a business, you're trying to run, say, like an apple farm. If you are looking for an apple tree that people can come pay to be on your farm and pick the apples from on their own without having to worry about them getting on a ladder, potentially hurting themselves, you can go for a dwarf or an extreme dwarf. And that works out great because they're much more manageable, they're shorter, and you won't have any risk of anyone falling off a ladder, right? On the other hand, if you have an apple farm and you're just going for bulk, you're not going to have any visitors, you just want to grow as many apples as you can, you want to ship them out and sell them, and that's your business, then you might be looking for something on the vigorous or extremely vigorous side of things. Maybe you're just looking for tonnage of apples and you're not really looking for something that's accessible from the ground. Maybe you're willing to work with ladders. So depends on your situation and your business. But another really good example of how grafts affect the plants that are attached to them, right? Okay, so if you're going to choose a rootstock, there are certain things you'll need to consider. And some of the top ones are the resistance to soil-borne diseases, right? So what's in your soil? What are things that you need to worry about? And you should probably choose something that will benefit you, right? So phylloxera, nematodes, so soil-borne diseases. Environmental tolerance is a big one. This is where we get a lot of different factors coming in. So if you're looking for drought resistance, if you have certain soil pH, salinity, certain types of soil textures, right, you can pick certain grape varieties that are successful in that. Also, you have to consider the influence the rootstock has on the scion, right? So like the vigor of the vine, the mineral nutrition, the ripening time. These are all things that are going to affect your grape variety and the fruit that you're going to produce. And it's a very scary decision, right? Because when you plant these grapevines, you're waiting years for this product. And then once you have this product, if you wanted to change it, you have to dig it out or you have to graft something else onto it. And then it just becomes this waiting game, right? So generally speaking, nurseries are very well educated and they give great recommendations and they have a general idea of what works for what varieties, what areas, and what soil types. So don't be afraid to reach out and ask from them. Okay, now we're going to talk about types of grapevine grafting. There's lots of different types. The timing is also different as well. A lot of it comes down to the type of cut that you're making. So yeah, we'll get into it. So there's a grafting process that happens in nurseries and is a grafting process that can happen in the fields, right? For the nurseries, you're typically taking rootstock and scion cuttings when the vines are dormant. Then you graft them together through whatever type of cut you're looking for. This one here that looks kind of like a shark teeth coming together, this is called the whip and tongue graft. I don't know why it's called that, but there are other types of cuts as well. So it makes the cut, puts the rootstock and scion together, then it's covered in wax. So the wax is to help protect it, help to encourage it to form a callus, and prevent any like bacteria or infection from happening in the wound, right? It's an open wound. So it's covered in wax. It's put into a warm, damp kind of incubator type of status, and this will help to wake up the cells in both the scion and the rootstock and to form that callus and to form that grafting union, right? So fast forward to when the springtime comes around, those cute little sticks are planted with the wax side up, and then they're trying to encourage root growth. So they're forming roots, and they have these cute little buds sticking out too, right? So after a couple of seasons, once they've established, they dig them up. They will test them for any diseases that they might have, make sure that they clear all of their testing. Then they will soak them in a heat-treated water bath, and that's around 50 degrees Celsius to kill any contaminating organisms on them. And then they get sold and shipped out and planted into vineyards and producing the lovely wine that you are enjoying today. So that is kind of the process for nurseries. I think it's a super interesting process. I think it'd be really fun to work at a nursery and see the process and get practice, because there's a lot of skill involved with grafting. It's not necessarily easy. So I think that's really cool. Okay. So like we saw in this last image, whip and tongue grafting is one of the ways you can graft, right? It is the most common for nurseries, according to our textbook, because it creates a very secure graft. Also, the way that it's cut, how it kind of takes a shaving from the side of each of these, it gives you the largest surface area of cambium contact. So you have the greatest chance of success in this type of grafting, right? So typically after the graft is made, you could tape it up and secure it after placement. Best results are when the rootstock and scion are in equal diameter. Something that may seem obvious but worth mentioning, right? You want them to be the same size or as close to the same size as possible so that cambium is matching up very nicely, right? Also, you want them to be on the smaller side, no more than 1/2 inch in diameter. Makes it a lot easier. Okay, then we have V-graft and omega graft. V-graft is just forming a V shape with your scion and then sticking it into your rootstock and wrapping it up. V-graft. Omega graft is a really fun one. This is a very specific type of tool that creates a lock and key shape for this process, and then they're forged together with a mechanical table device, and then it goes through the similar process. Then we have a T-bud graft, and this is typically done in the vineyard, but you take a knife and you cut a T shape into the vine or into the rootstock. Then you plant the bud of your scion, and then you wrap it up, and then the bud will hopefully take, and then it will produce the scion out of that, right? So this is a really good option for grafting over a well-established vineyard. It's beneficial because it's a smaller wound in the grapevine, so the thought process is hopefully you're less susceptible to diseases or infections from happening. So that is nice. It's a very old school method of grafting, but it still works. So it helps. Field grafting is a little bit different. You can do the T-bud in the vineyard, in the field. There are other situations where maybe you just want to plant the rootstock first. Maybe you don't want to plant the grafted situation. Maybe you just buy the rootstock, establish it. Then once the rootstock is established and the roots are nice and developed into the ground, then you graft your scion on top of it after that. So slightly different timing and process, but that is possible. And for this is like a truly very Frankenstein process of field grafting, because you just chop off the head of the grapevine, the rootstock that you're growing, and then you graft in what will be your scion into that and then establish it from there, right? So this is the process. We have a couple of like V-shaped cuts established into our rootstock. We tie it up nice and tight, and then we cover it with wax to protect the wound, and hopefully those will take in the spring. Okay, timing of grafting, it really depends, right? So if you're going to do bench grafting, winter is when most of the work takes place, right? If you're doing field grafts, you're going out into the vineyard and you're doing these grafts, this usually takes place in the spring after the threat of frost has passed, right? So you don't want to risk frost because it can hurt the wound and you could have a very hard time making that graft successful, right? Considerations: the scion should be collected in the winter while the vine is dormant, and the rootstock should be active in early spring, right? So the rootstock is active. Hopefully it'll start to form some bonds with that scion, and as the scion is exposed to warmer weather in the spring, it will awaken and reciprocate and connect to the rootstock, right? So that's the thought process. Here's a picture of tea bud grafting happening in the spring at Ridge Vineyards. They're going through, they're making very small cuttings, and they're grafting over on top of their rootstock. And you can kind of see this large cut here. You can see where they cut off either the previous variety or rootstock, and they grafted right here into the side, and they were able to pull that up and train from that part of the vine. It's a cool thing. Okay, challenges. This takes skill and precision, right? Even if you grafted 100 vines in your block, you will see a failure rate. You will see maybe 1 out of every, 30 vines failed. That's actually a really good failure rate, right? And then you'll have to go back and try to regraft them the next year when the next window opens up, right? So it takes time, it takes patience, right? And that's also why one of the challenges is vigorous management and monitoring. So you have to monitor for signs of graft failure. You have to monitor for possible infection, right? If you're doing these grafts in the vineyard and they're not certified by a lab, you could potentially have some grape crown gall disease, right? You could have different things infecting the graft wound, and then you'd have to go back and cut it and treat it again, or completely just cut out that vine because it's infected. Another problem that sometimes we face is the compatibility of the rootstock and scion. Some of them are just not compatible, and they just have a hard time making a union. I don't really know why, but it exists, and it happens. So there you have it, folks. We have grapevine grafting. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Here are your student learning objectives. As always, feel free to dive into the textbook if you'd like more information. There's so much to be said about rootstocks. This is really just the tip of the iceberg. But anyways, thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time.